Hey team, and welcome back to the channel. So this would normally be around the time that we would be talking about astrological talismanic opportunities that would be coming up following our Aries full moon. But unfortunately, I don't have anything to share with you for that. Now, I'm sure that one day there will come a time when we have good and helpful, useful waning moon talisman opportunities, but today is not that day. Things still just are not quite lining up for us the way that we would need to. So instead, I wanted to do a video talking to you about something that's been on my mind the last few days, to kind of see, maybe answer some questions, and then kind of provide my thoughts on a topic. So for those who don't know, as part of the Patreon, every Friday and Sunday, we meet for office hours, and this is basically just a time for everyone to get together and talk and share ideas, get feedback, troubleshoot problems, celebrate successes, and just kind of share together different techniques or tools or anything like that that we're doing. And often during this time, we get really good questions that are worth thinking about. And most of the time I have good answers for it, but I don't always. And this is one of those times. So the question that was asked was something like, when you're doing astrological magic, when you're doing petitions, what is it exactly that you're talking to? Are you interfacing with like the spirit of the planet? Are you interfacing with an intelligence of the planet, of an angel of the planet? Like what is it exactly that we're talking with here? And so this obviously raised a different question, a different related question, that is like, well, what is the difference between like a planetary intelligence and a planetary spirit? Like, what does that mean? How are these concepts different, and what purpose would we call on one or the other? And I didn't have a very good answer for that question at that time, partly because I don't think it's kind of how I think about things. So it's never really something that I've planned out or come to an agreement on, or like a conclusion on, I guess. But just because I don't think of something a particular way doesn't mean that I shouldn't have an answer to this question, or be able to just kind of like understand and be able to tell somebody sort of like what the difference between these two ideas or concepts are in the medieval like cosmological hierarchy. So since then, I've been reading, researching, and reaching out to people, the three R's, who might have a better understanding of this concept, to get some ideas about what these are, how they're different, and kind of where these concepts came from, and whether or not they're actually useful to us today when we're practicing astrological magic. So today I wanted to spend some time and talk a little about what the difference is between planetary intelligence, planetary spirits, and kind of how this concept evolved. So the first place that most people are going to come in contact with these ideas of a planetary spirit versus a planetary intelligence is going to be Cornelius Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy. In book 2, chapter 22, Agrippa provides the magic squares of all the planets, and he also discusses how you can create the sigils and the names for the planets, their spirits, and their intelligences. He tells us specifically that the intelligence is used when we want to do good things with the planet, and the spirit is used when we want to do bad things with the planet. Now, this concept, kind of on its face, sounds very silly to me, but I wanted to sort of understand and dig into more about why this, like what this is, what the reasoning behind for this is. So I had a really good conversation with a friend, Sam Block, who writes the Digital Ambler blog, and he told me that his current understanding of the differences between planetary intelligences and planetary spirits is that the spirit is sort of like the force behind the planet. It's the power, it's the influence, it's the thing that sort of manifests to us. It's what we think about when we think about, the planet Jupiter and kind of what it does, or the sun and what it does in astrology or in the world. It's the influence, kind of the raw power influence of the planet. The intelligence, on the other hand, is like the executive function of the planet. It is the thing that helps to direct and guide and execute the plans of the planet, essentially. It is an entity which, pulls the levers and the gears of the planet and kind of like helps it get done what it needs to do. It controls the spigots, as it were, to let the planet be able to do what it needs to do. And I thought this was a really great way to put it, and it really helped, open my eyes to what's happening here. Even though this isn't really how I thought about planets, it really made me think about like what the implications for this system are and why Agrippa might be using it. I did a little bit of reading in another book, C.S. Lewis's The Discarded Image, which is a really great book and something that I highly recommend to anybody who's interested in traditional astrology, in medieval cosmology. It's just super helpful to kind of get into the mind and dispel some misconceptions about the medieval universe and how that directly impacts what we do with astrology or astrological magic too. And in this book, he talks about the planetary eye of kittens. that are running amok. Let me show you my kittens. Hold on. This is Cinnamon, and he really wants to be a lighting operator or an audio engineer when he grows up because he wants to play with my lighting equipment and my audio cords. But in C.S. Lewis's The Discarded Image, he has a section where he talks about sort of like the heavenly inhabitants, what they do, what there are, their different functions, their different hierarchies. And he talks a little bit about the intelligences. He doesn't give a whole lot of information about what they do, but what he says does concur with Sam's understanding that it is a guiding force, the executive function of a planet. And what was interesting is that he talks about how initially the intelligence of a planet was in or with the planet. But then as things progressed, authors talked about the intelligences being separate or outside of the planet, which I thought was fascinating. It was interesting because what it kind of brought to my mind was that it sounded very similar, or sort of, it sounded very similar to Christian apologist astrology. So what I mean by that is, it's probably no surprise that astrology and Christianity have not always gotten along very well. There are particular implications in the practice of astrology that do not really agree with foundational theological concepts in Christianity. The most important is the radical free will. Christianity teaches us that everyone has a radical free will and they have the power to execute that will in the world, and nothing can really interfere or get in the way of it. Astrology, of course, any sort of system that has a predestination that can foretell the future has direct implications on the ability to do that. Because if the planets can control, you can have influence on you, then how much of a free will do you actually have? So that's sort of the biggest one, but there are other ones as well. And this idea of a planetary spirit being the idea of a planet having a spirit and being this sort of mindless orb and needing to be directed by an outside intelligence sounds very much like something somebody would say to make astrology work better within a Christian context. Because what this does is it does two things. The first is that it sort of removes the planets from their original conceptualization as deities, like the planets were gods in the Babylonian pantheon or the seats of the gods, and they were divine figures or entities that could be observed, that could be tracked, that could be understood, that could be negotiated with, related with. And that's really kind of the main focus that we as astrological magicians have on the planets. That's not our only focus, and it isn't a focus that we only see in astrological magic. I would argue that this ability to interact with and negotiate and understand the planets and the divinity that they represent is also the goal of natal astrology or any other kind of astrology. Kind of like that, the ability to relate to and understand how these signify our actions or, our destinies. So it takes them from that and it turns them into soulless cogs in the machine, because it removes them of their own sort of executive divine function and gives that to an outside spirit that has been kind of set to preside over it like some sort of minister. So the first thing this does is it demotes the planets from deities to mindless cogs in a machine. The second thing that it does is it then makes the planets who were once pagan gods now subservient to the Christian God. This is something that we see not only in Christianity but also in Islam, where many of the Muslim astrological authors will insert a phrase after they make some sort of prediction or share an aphorism of what's probably going to happen. They'll say, so long as Allah wills it. And the basic idea of this, of course, is that nothing can happen in astrology, no matter what a planet might be suggesting or how you might interpret a situation, that nothing can happen without the permission and the consent of Allah or God or, the spirit deity. In Christianity, we see this kind of come up a bit in certain biblical stories, particularly the story of God halting the sun of the sky for Joshua and the Israelites to be able to fight more during the daytime. And then probably another one in the solar eclipse that accompanies the crucifixion of Jesus. We know that is probably not a real solar eclipse because it occurred on Passover, on Good Friday, and that is on a full moon. So, solar eclipses are new moons. So we see this theme here where now the planets are no longer deities and they are now, subservient to God. They have to follow his will. God set them in motion and has probably outlined to them particular things that he wants done at particular times, and it's up to the intelligence or the angel that is set up as the minister of this planet to execute it as they see fit, according to the plan, unless there's some last minute change that God then like overwrites, whether like because of supplication through prayer or, you know, whatever reason he sees fit to do so. And yeah, like realizing this, like coming to this idea of planetary intelligences and planetary spirits, kind of from this lens of how it allows astrology to mesh very neatly with Christian theology. You know, that's not really how I think about astrology. That's not really how I think about astrological magic. And so I'm not 100% sure like how actually useful this distinction between an intelligence and a spirit really is, because it's never really something that I've encouraged people to think about. If it helps, you know, if you're coming from a Christian background and this idea of like an angel being set over the planet helps you and you're not like actually talking to the planet itself, then that's fine. I'm not here to take that away from you. I think that's fine. But it's not really my conceptualization, or the one that I really encourage people to have. So it's just like, I'm not sure that it's super useful to me, though it might be useful to others, and that's totally fair. But where this kind of gets even more wonky is so the Agrippa text, the sort of like older translations, they specifically say that the intelligence is used for good magic and then the spirit is used for bad magic. But I was kind of struck by how in the new translation by Eric Perdue, he chooses to translate this as the intelligence for good and the daimon for bad. And this sent up some red flags for me. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to dig in and see like what exactly this word is that's being used like in the Latin translations. Was it, you know, like what word was this that's being translated that before had been spirit and now is daimon. So I was able to find a copy of the Latin text, and it is daimonium. It is daimon. It is specifically daimon that Agrippa talks about. It is the intelligence is good and useful for good productive magic, and the daimon is for bad destructive magic. So, if we're using daimonium, if that's the word Agrippa is using, if we're talking about daimonium, then we're not even having the same conversation as spirit from before. When we're talking about spirits, we're using the word spiritus, like the Holy Spirit in Christianity is the Spiritus Sanctus. And so we're not talking about the same thing. Spirits and daimons are not the same thing. A spirit is, in medieval cosmology, a spirit is a force that is in between matter and, this is Tango. This is Cinnamon's brother, Tango. But a spirit okay. A spirit is a connective force that reaches and bridges the gap between material and immaterial things. So people, they have a soul and they have a body, but a body is made of matter and a soul is made of immaterial things, aether. I don't know if that's actually true. I don't know what the soul's made of. It might be aether. And these two are so incompatible that they can't interact with each other. Obviously, that's not the case. Obviously, the soul does interact with the body, so how does it do that? Spirit. Spirit is how that works. The spirit is they're like wrestling behind my back. The spirit is a connective power that allows the soul and the body to talk to one another, to interface with one another, and to exchange information. So the spirit is the vehicle through which the soul commands the body to have motion, to do things, to make judgment, like me moving my hands around incessantly. And the body is then able to communicate to the soul through spirit what's happening around it so that the soul can then command it better. So in the human body, we specifically have a spirit called the animal spirits, which we would recognize in modern anatomy as like the nervous system and the sensory, like the five senses. So the animal spirit is how our body relays information to the soul. It relays touch, taste, sound, hearing, and sensation to the soul, and then the soul takes that information, makes a complete picture out of it, and tells the body what to do. That's how the animal spirit works. But the body and the soul transmit information through the animal spirit, and that's what spirits are. That's what they are. A spirit is it is in medieval cosmology a connective substance that allows soul to work in the physical world. The Holy Spirit in Christianity is the vehicle through which God is able to work miracles in the world. It's just kind of like this idea that, you know, this stuff over here can't interact with this stuff, but you slap a layer of spirit over it and suddenly everybody's connected back and forth. And that's very different from a daimon. A daimon is a sort of like unique phantasmal entity that executes certain functions and is a little bit more of like an angel. It's more about what we would think of as an angel today. In fact, in a lot of occult texts, the daimon is referred to as like a guardian angel. So that like just sent up a whole other thing of red flags, because now I am aware of this word that's being used, daimon, and how by the time that Agrippa is writing, daimon has already kind of undergone this metamorphosis to change from its original conceptualization to like basically like a lawful neutral kind of spiritual entity, into a demon, like a negative infernal fallen angel spirit, and that's just not what they are. Like that's not what they are. And I just kind of find this idea to be a little silly, because what's happened is that Agrippa has now kind of characterized this as like each planet has a little angel over its shoulder and a little devil over its shoulder, like it's a Bugs Bunny in a cartoon. And I just find that to be kind of silly, just kind of on the face of it, because I guess like my own conceptualizations of the universe, of nature, and of morality just don't really mesh with this. And knowing that daimon aren't like this, that this isn't what daimon are supposed to be, really just kind of makes this whole passage seem a little silly. And it's not the first time that something in Agrippa has made me think like, oh, that's weird. But this was like a really interesting example of how this all kind of came out. And this opens up a whole new can of worms to me personally, because I don't think daimon can be evil. I don't think you can have an evil daimon. And this isn't the first time that Agrippa really talks about it, because he has another section in his book where he talks about finding the name of the guardian daimon, but he also says that you can find the name of your evil daimon by like an inverse process. And it's just like, I'm not sure. Just like the idea that daimon can be evil is weird to me. Because originally, Neoplatonic authors would talk about daimon as if they were more like, in his work, Iamblichus talks about 3 different grades or types of daimon. You have the super celestial daimon, which are at the top, and they're more like divinities. They contemplate divinity, and they're just off out there somewhere far away doing something we don't know what it is, but it's probably super important and we shouldn't get involved. The next are the celestial daimon, and these are the daimon, the angels, for a lack of a better term, that are set over the planets and the stars. These are the planets and the stars. They are the source of they are that intelligence that is in the planet, that is of the planet, that is the planet, in a way that's very different from the intelligence that would become, outside of this body, as we kind of start to get more Christian with it. And then finally we have what are called the invisible powers. And these are daimon that are more like in the air, that are more like in the world around us, and represent either natural forces like wind and rain, or they represent like guardian spirits, guardian entities of locations like river and mountain spirits. And they have their own function. They do things in the world, and they're more like the mindless cogs. They don't really think or reason. They just execute the protocol. So I say all this to say that this conversation that we've been having about like what's the difference between an intelligence and a spirit might not be actually all that important, because the word spirit here that's being used in like older English translations of Agrippa is actually daimon, and whether or not there can be an evil daimon is like a whole other sort of like theological conversation that I'm not sure is like, it's just like a whole other can of worms. Where Agrippa got the idea of, the intelligence is for good things and the spirit of the daimon is for bad things, I'm not 100% sure. In his translation, Eric Perdue cites a previous translator who suggests that this information, or at least the information on the magic squares that this is a part of, comes from the Secretum Secretorum, which is associated with Pseudotomy. But there is another Secretum Secretorum that is much more famous that is associated with Pseudo-Aristotle. And I have been so far unsuccessful in getting that Secretum Secretorum that is Pseudotomies. So if somebody out there has it, give it to me, please. I would like to know. To see like if there's more information or where this came from. But that's really all I kind of had to share at this point. I just kind of wanted to like talk you through this journey of exploration that I've been on and share this information. I'm sure that I could talk more about like related concepts or issues that come up from this probably for a long time, but I would definitely start to ramble a little bit more than I already have. But I really appreciate you, watching and listening to this and taking the time to go on this journey with me and, ask these questions and kind of suss out for yourself what means what to you.
But of course, a special thank you to my patrons. I really appreciate your questions and our conversations that we have in office hours, and I hope that this new information has helped kind of maybe answer or shed new light on some of that conversation that I wasn't able to really have at the time. And I would love to hear everybody's thoughts about kind of what they think about this concept of like dividing planets into like their intelligences and their spirits, because it's always just been so much easier for me just to be like, this is the sun. He's pretty cool. It's the sun god, like the god that is the sun. And just work with that. But anyway, I would love to hear your own thoughts and experiences and how this helps or hinders maybe even your own like ability to work with the planets and astrological magic. But anyway, thank you guys so much, and I hope to see you all again on our Scorpio solar eclipse.